All right, well, welcome. Basically, my name is John McDougall, and I'm sitting in as the moderator of a Meet the Candidates opportunity for the Select Board election, which is to be held on the 28th of the month. It'll be held here in the Town Hall, and there will be the opportunity for all voters, registered voters in Northfield, to apply for an absentee ballot. You apply for an absentee ballot by contacting Dan Campbell, either by telephone. You can call him at the Town Hall on extension 112, or you could email him, and that information is available through the Town Hall also, or you could text him if you so desire. But anyway he hears from you, he will mail you an absentee ballot. You have to allow time for that to be sent out to you, or you have to swing by the Town Hall when it's open to ask for one. The absentee ballot looks like this. It's got a yellow section on the top, and I'll address that in just a minute. This is an opportunity that we have established a tradition from previous years or prior elections by offering this discussion under the auspices of Northfield Area Tourism and Business Association, otherwise known as NATABA, and the Northfield Kiwanis. We've been able to hold that by courtesy of the Stoyers at Centennial House in the past, but obviously with the current constraints that we're in, we can't do that, as we can't get more than 10 people in one room. So this will have to carry out the same function for you all, and we recognize that fundamentally you have to have the interest to have looked up the event on BNCTV, and that means that this is not being broadcast live, so anybody that speaks today is basically sitting just talking to each other. It'll become a conversation. You will be notified by either contacting the website next door, the Neighbours Online item, or the Facebook page of BNCTV, and then also it will be available on channel 17. So whichever method you choose to look at this presentation or discussion, you can expect to spend perhaps 45 minutes to an hour. That's what we'll try and contain it in that length of time. If it does demand a little extra, we'll allow it to run over, but obviously we're trying to give you some idea of roughly how long this procedure might take. With that in mind, the election for Select Board involves two candidates. That's B. Jake and Joe Stacey. I, on initially being appraised of this, thought that's a bit strange. We've a situation where we're moving from a 3-person select board to a 5-person select board. We only have 2 applicants, and we have a situation where one of our existing select board members is retiring out. So it's like, why do we bother having an election at the present moment at all? We're in a process. The evolution of this step has been over a considerable time, and I just want to summarize very briefly the history. Back in 2011, a group of concerned citizens got to the point of discussing how the administration of Northfield might be developed and improved. Obviously, they were informal. It took some time to get to the stage of actually appointing the first town governance committee, which was initiated in 2012 and finished its work in 2013 under the auspices of Barry Bordner and a group of 5 very active citizens, 5 or 6 maybe, I'm not sure. But the reality was that group did a lot of external research and came up with 2 fundamental recommendations. One was that we should upgrade or strengthen the town administrator's position, and 2, that we should consider to move forward from a 3-person board to a 5-person board. Their recommendation also included a suggestion that essentially that should process or be processed in steps, and that the first step of appointing an upgraded town administrator was the way to begin. That led to an interesting situation over 2 or 3 years where we had 2 or 3 rapid changes over in town administrators. The general feeling was that improvements had been seen, but there was some uncertainty as to the actual practicalities of the step. That led to a second town governance committee deciding to reappraise or re-examine and discuss the implications with both members of the town staff, concerned citizens, and they made excellent progress between 2018 and 2019 when they re-examined the situation. That group, in the end, acknowledged that improvements had been achieved and suggested that we should continue the process of going for a 5-person board. That was put before the town meeting last year in 2019. That allowed a recommendation to go forward to the state for certification. That has now come back from the state. They say yes, so there is in this absentee ballot a very formal question, which I'm actually going to read. It's going to take a second or two, but you'll see that essentially it explains why we're having this election on the 28th. It asks first if an act passed by the General Court in the year 2019 relative to the selectmen of the town of Northfield be accepted. And then it provides a summary of the bill. It says, notwithstanding the provisions of any general or special law to the contrary, the Select Board in the town of Northfield shall consist of 5 members. Each Select Board member shall serve for a 3-year term, with no more than 2 Select Board members running concurrently. At the first annual town meeting, election meeting, following at least 64 days after the effective date of this act, 1 additional Select Board member shall be elected for a 3-year term, and 1 additional Select Board member shall be elected to a 2-year term, which is essentially why we're meeting today. Today we are replacing the retiring Select Board member, who was Tracy Rogers, who served for the full 3 years. And we are in a situation where we have 1 replacement. We have to wait until next town meeting in 2021 before we can have the election for another 3-year term and 2-year term. So that sets up the discussion for today. A further mention is that I will ask each of the candidates to give a summary of their background and experience and reasons for enthusiasm at volunteering for this particular slot. We'll ask them to speak for as long as they choose to. I'll try and make sure that they're approximately even, and after that's been completed, we'll hit or address a number of topics that are current in Northfield and allow them to express an opinion. Obviously that could get complicated and could easily extend much longer than an hour and a half, so we'll simply look for key highlights and allow each of them to have a conversation that addresses their interest or particular relevance. They may also choose to say, I'm not ready to talk about that at this stage, and that's perfectly acceptable on each individual topic. With that said, we had a coin toss to get started, and Jake will introduce herself, express a little bit about her background and her reasons for finding the enthusiasm to put herself forward. And I would just like to congratulate both the candidates for having the essential bravery to stand for election and put themselves in the hot seat of being a Select Board member. B.
Thank you, John. I think I'll start with why I'm running and then get into my experience, because it dovetails with what you were talking about. So I was on the 2018 to 2019 Town Governance Study Committee, and we utilized the work that John had described in the earlier years, approximately 5 or 6 before we were constituted as a committee. And we started that committee with 6 very different viewpoints about the size of the Select Board. And over the course of many months, we did interviews with town administrators, we did interviews with department heads, we sent out a survey to department heads and committee chair people, and it was a long year and a very interesting year of doing our homework. And we talked with 8 different towns, a few of which overlapped with the research in 2013. But they were all new towns, and we got their experience with going from 3 to 5, and what were some of the pros and cons of doing that. So by the end of the year, we came to a consensus as a committee that we felt going from 3 to 5 would make a difference for Northfield. And it's because of that process, and because of that arriving at a conclusion and a consensus, I really found that I loved working within town government, because different people come together, they care about Northfield, or as I like to say, they're passionate about Northfield, and they bring that passion into the committees, and you do your best for Northfield. Based on that experience, though, it's been a long process from last town meeting to this year to get that implemented. So I want to continue in town government. We've spent the last year following the progress through the state legislature and with town council. So that's basically where the impetus came from. And I like to say I'm passionate about Northfield, and I want to use that passion and that experience that I have from about 30, I've lost count, but approximately 30 years of working in business and technology. I want to bring that to support and benefit the town. So that's essentially why I'm running. In terms of background, I went to Fitchburg State College as a biology major, got very involved in student government, and decided to start working in college admissions and financial aid. And I did that for about a decade. So I had a lot of experience, even though I don't have children, I have a lot of experience from that phase of my life in dealing with parents and that huge decision and big financial decision of going to college. I worked at a 2-year college in New Hampshire as part of the university. So was really involved in getting people to figure out what they wanted to do, get their skills in line, and then move on to a 4-year institution. After that, or while I was doing that, I should say, I got a graduate degree in human development, and then I moved into a program at Northeastern in the School of Engineering, and I was able to use my admissions experience with the engineering school and at the same time get my master's in information systems. So from there I went into software development, where I worked with architects and engineers and project accounting, cost accounting, payroll, things like that. And then from there I went into a networking company, had the opportunity to move west, so I went to California in the Bay Area in some of the early days of Silicon Valley when it was a lot of fun. Lots of experience, lots of working 24/7 with, at the time it was a pager, where you get buzzed, as opposed to looking at a cell phone. So I've seen a lot of technology changes over the year, and grew at one point with, after working in networking, I went to eBay and I worked with them for about 7 years, initially when they were fairly small, and then as they grew, I think when I left it was about 13,000 employees. So my last job at eBay, I was managing a budget of about $4 million a year, and I had about 20 employees on different teams. But the key thing at eBay and any technology company is you have to work cross-functionally. You have to work with other groups in order to get applications and new ideas, new products out onto the website. You can't just have an idea, as Facebook does, and just throw it out onto the website. You have to develop it. You have to get buy-in from people who run the machines and want to make sure the site stays stable. So lots of cross-functional experience, lots of working with different groups, under pressure. A lot of times it was like working in an emergency room. you know, if a server goes down and that's your business, and that's affecting the business of thousands of sellers around the country, and then eventually millions of different sellers around the world, you take those kinds of concerns seriously. I reached a point where I needed to get out of technology just from a personal standpoint. So I went and did a year as a VP for the Humane Society in Silicon Valley. And that's how really what I fell in love with was rescuing dogs, not so much the marketing and the being, you know, in an office. So I took the opportunity to move back to Western Massachusetts with about 6 dogs. We moved cross country, and I grew up in the area, so it was really, my dad was hitting about 80 at the time, and so I wanted to spend time with him. My nephew at the time was in 5th grade at the Northfield Elementary School, so I wanted to spend time with him, and I wanted more space. I wanted more space for dogs. I wanted more space for myself. I was a little tired of the rental lifestyle and having to move a lot, particularly in the city. So Northfield was perfect for that. And I got to spend 3 great years with my dad before he passed. And I'm still rescuing animals. Instead of California animals, I'm rescuing animals from New York City and North Carolina. So I'm still doing that. And that leads me full circle back to getting involved with the Town Governance Study Committee, and I'm currently on the Historical Commission too. So.
Thank you, Bea. That's a very nice summary, and Joe, you can either amplify or match it or choose to run a little longer. She ran about 10 minutes, so you're welcome to go for 10, 15 if you like.
No, I'll just start by introduction. My name is Joseph Stacy. I'm an 11-year resident of Northfield, and before I begin, I'd like to formally thank the TABA and the Northfield Kiwanis and our moderator, John McDougall, for doing a wonderful job, and BNCTV for filming it today. I'm excited to have the opportunity to run for Select Board. I've been involved in town politics for quite a while. I was recommended by a friend years ago to get involved, and I've just enjoyed it. It's been a wonderful experience for me. I've grown. I've learned lessons. I've made errors a lot. But from those errors and from those lessons, I keep evolving and becoming a better version of myself. And I hope to keep continuing to do so. Particularly, I am pro 5-person board. I was part of the committee originally in 2012 as well, who studied 2 questions, the option to move from a 3 to 5 member board and the option to move to an empowered town administrator. So we chose the empowered town administrator option, but tabled the concept of the 5-member board, which I was a little concerned about at the time, but you know, if that's the decision that we made, then I accepted that and moved forward. And we find ourselves here today now with the potential to move towards that 5-member board, which I really wanted to be a part of. Originally, I didn't want to be a part of a 3-member board. I'm a service-connected disabled veteran. None of my disabilities are cognitive. Thank you for that, yeah. But I do have my setbacks. I'm asymptomatic, which means my presence won't be a 100% will I'll always want it to be. I'll do my best, but I can't make any promises. And that's part of the reasons I think for that 5-member board was to give people the opportunity to be human and to have a life and maybe not be able to contribute 100%, but be there as much as they possibly can. So I'm here today, and I'm going to do my best to do what I can.
Perfect. I think those are 2 very good summaries for somebody to sort of start to get to know the candidates, and we'll give everybody the opportunity to visit some of the topics that are current in Northfield, if you like, as we proceed for the next 30 minutes or so, and hopefully you'll enjoy the experience. The very first question we had that was recorded for the list was an excellent one to start with. It says, how do you think the COVID virus has affected the Northfield community's normal functionings? And we don't need to look any further than the fact that you're sitting observing your screen and not talking live to realize some of the impact. But I think it's worthwhile visiting that topic yet again just a little bit further. What do you think the COVID-19 impact is likely to be on the administration of the town? And I'm going to suggest Joe might start and B might pick it up. So we'll try and alternate.
Thank you. On the topic of COVID, it's a very sensitive topic and one that has generated a lot of fear for good reason as of late. I can only make decisions on the information I'm given. I hope to make good judgment calls. I trust that our Board of Health and the state's recommendations for methods of handling this will be followed. Beyond that, I don't have any personal opinions on how things should be done. That's for the professionals to decide.
Thank you for that answer. B, would you care to amplify or comment or not?
I'm looking at the question and I'm looking at how it's affected the piece that says how, this is from Joanne, how this has affected the Northfield community's normal functionings. Just a couple of observations. One is the library is such an important central place, so to not be able to go there on a regular basis in the same way and be inside that beautiful building with those lovely people, I think that's one key thing. While I don't have children in the school, I think obviously the school is definitely been affected. And so I know of quite a few people who are going through that challenge of being their own IT support at home and trying to teach. I think from a town hall standpoint, obviously, that's another central location. We often go there, things are posted there. I think the challenge is going to be a continued presence and a robust presence online for all of these institutions. There's just much more emphasis on communication and how do you meet online. A lot of people are used to that and a lot of people are not used to that. And for the foreseeable future, I think meetings and information will be mostly focused still online.
Can I ask you a question just related to that? Would you see it as a select board function to help to promote the opportunity for voters, citizens, townspeople of Northfield to acquire the skills for remote participation in meetings?
No, not necessarily. I think that might take the select board. There's plenty of things that the select board needs to worry about. I do think there's probably an overall issue of internet access for people that would be interesting to get some feedback on from the community. When you go west of Boston, internet becomes, or any rural area, internet becomes more and more sparse and spotty. And if all of your, for example, learning online, if that's all taking place and it takes a lot of bandwidth to do that, that's a challenge if you don't have good internet. I mean, I live on Main Street and I still get sometimes spotty internet. So, and I'm just doing basic things. So no, I don't necessarily see the select board doing that. I do think it's incumbent upon the select board, and I see them working on this, is really getting the information out there, allowing a lot more time to do that, because people are not necessarily, coming and checking some posting that they normally would a couple of days before the select board meets. You really want to get those agendas out there well in advance, like a good week, I would say, if at all possible, so people know what's being discussed and can get themselves organized to participate.
So if I could summarize, just concentrating on communication would be an area of interest to you directly.
Yes.
You did touch, both of you, on the schools, so just being aware that as of Saturday, tomorrow, 1 o'clock, Warwick is discussing whether they want to be part of the Pioneer Valley Regional School Board or whether they want to break off and go their own way, which would be somewhat of an event that would have an impact on the school. And we are operating under tighter and tighter constraints on money in today's situation. Anyway, what is your view on the evolution of the Regional School Board organization? And I'll start with Joe on this one.
I have 2 children that attend Northfield Elementary School. I was saddened to hear that Warwick was shut down. Honestly, I don't quite understand the bus route transportation issue that students are going to have. It's a long journey. I had a brother who lived in Warwick, so I would commute from Northfield to Warwick, and for children to get up that early in the morning and make that long commute with severe weather, unpredictable events that could occur, it puts a lot of risk, and I don't think it's such a good idea, and I was kind of opposed to it, but it's out of my control, and I trust the people that are working on it are going to do their best to solve that issue. So
it's not an issue that's over yet, put it that way.
Yeah.
Fee, do you have any comment beyond what you already said?
No, not really, because I would need to know more about it. My initial reaction just from reading the paper was a certain amount of sadness. But you understand people feel strongly about their local schools. I think most of what we're talking about falls under the school committee itself. So that's an area that I would like to spend more time getting up to speed on and going around and meeting people and hearing more about their concerns.
That's a fair comment. Let's switch topics and head for the other end of the population and consider the older cohort of people in Northfield who are obviously facing issues with regard to self-protection in today's jeopardized world, but at the same time there is interest in what is being initiated in the Neighbours at Home project, which has been developing under the auspices of Homer Staveley and Bill McGee. Would you care to comment on that, based on the fact that you've just had your father's experience, and just how much support would the Select Board consider, or separation from that would the Select Board consider to be appropriate?
Separation from the Neighbours at Home? I would actually need more information on how that works and how that connects to the Select Board. I do know they have quite an active membership and they're doing quite a bit. Right. So I find that really exciting in terms of the level of involvement in moving that whole issue forward. But again, I'm not quite sure where the Select Board would fit with that. So,
fair comment.
Although I will say, because now I'm over 60, I will say that there's a large population of the Northfield population is over 60. I think it's approximately a third or close to a third. So that's a good chunk of the residents. So that is an area that anybody in town government would need to keep an eye on. And if Neighbours at Home is generating a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of great ideas, it's something to be paid attention to.
Joe, want to pick up that thread?
I agree with B. If the initiative is there to support and help, it should be supported 100%, and that's where I would stand in that topic.
Yeah, good. Good, thank you. There is a different topic here which is totally separate, and a question was asked: would the candidates endorse the expansion of the Community Preservation Act? Are both of you familiar with the Community Preservation Act? Because I would not choose to amplify any information on it, but does involve a vote from the town essentially to look for a slight increase in the tax base to allow for some community funded projects. Are you familiar with it?
Yes, I'm familiar. Are you asking me or Joe?
I think I'd start with Joe on this
Okay.
one. And then
That's what I thought.
Okay, I'm fully in support of expanding the CPA. I believe that 0.5%, I believe that's where we're at now, is good and it's made an impact. And I'd like to see what would happen maybe at 1.5 or at least 1. We don't have to go up to the 3 marker. I think that's the maximum amount that could be allowed, but I do feel that it has made an impact, and it doesn't hurt to put a couple more bucks in where we could see a direct reflection of that money right here in our own community. A lot of times I've spoken with friends and neighbors, and they've wondered, where does my real estate tax money go? And all of that money's already allocated, but these CPA funds are specifically earmarked for projects right here in our community that benefit our neighbors and ourselves. So I'm all in support of the expansion of that.
Thank you for that. Do you want to add or amplify or agree with that?
I agree with that. I think it reminds me kind of a 401k in that you're putting in money and somebody else is putting in money too. So you're actually getting more than what you're putting in, which I think might get lost a little bit in the shuffle of town meetings with all the articles that we go through. So it probably requires, a summarized explanation so people get it. And then conversely, it would be nice to see something drop on the other side so that that discussion about CPA doesn't get caught up in an overall increase in the tax base, because we're definitely getting money back from that. I think the Northfield Elementary School as well as this building here have all benefited from that. So it's hard to argue with improvements to the elementary school that you didn't completely pay for because, well, you paid for it, but you got extra
Some
money
help.
on top of it. And I think that gets a little lost in the discussion. So yes, I'm definitely in favor of it.
Bang for the buck.
Yes, bang for the buck.
Big topic. Let's explore your concerns or interest or attitudes towards the work done by the water company and the Northfield water supply issues, which are considerable. And in this case, I would give B the opportunity to kick the ball off the center spot.
Thank you. As somebody put it, I've actually emailed with a couple of town residents who have been involved and vocal about the water situation. As somebody put it, it's a can of worms. And it sounds like a big can of worms in terms of issues. I was doing my homework on it and asking for more information from people, which I'm still processing because it's detailed and complex. The town water committee, from what I understand in reading the Greenfield Recorder, they started the committee last fall, and I'm assuming that much of that discussion has been in executive session. So there's this water company issue that hasn't really come, it's been kind of on hibernation or hiatus from a public standpoint. So it would be nice to find out where that water committee is at. The last that I know, it's been almost a year since the committee was formed and was discussed in the Greenfield Recorder.
It is a big issue, and there's no question that communication on that issue is going to be particularly critical as it develops.
Yes.
So, do you have any comment beyond that, Joe? Or
I do not. I don't have enough information to make a comment on that question.
which is typical for all of us, I think,
Yeah.
in some ways.
It's deeply concerning.
All right. Another big topic, which you can express a view on if you prefer, the selectmen's candidates. What do you think about the need for a public safety facility to help our police, fire, and EMTs, etc., perform their duties better? That one I'll let Joe open the discussion up.
I feel as though with the upcoming expansion of Northfield and the growth that we're going to have, it's important now to start investing towards having a goal such as this. I'm not sure that we can afford within our budget to purchase something like that now, but I think we should start earmarking some funds for this to come in the near future. I think it's important to have all these safety facilities as well as the rescue diver group involved in this as well, giving them a space. Northfield, from what I read in an article, is the only town within the area that provides this service, and a lot of the funds that come from that organization are self-invested. Granted, we do have to keep a conscious aspect of the budget which would be involved in doing things like this. It is important to realize that these things are needed, not necessarily right now, but they will be needed soon, and I fully support it. This act, fiscally, responsibly, but definitely something that needs to come through.
To be addressed over a period of time. How about you, Bean?
Similarly to what Joe said, I mean, when you look at the facilities and you know that part of the fire station actually can't support the weight of a vehicle, that's a concern. I think the challenge with this area, though, is where is the process actually at? It's important, it costs a lot of money, there's a lot of steps that need to be done, and again, this was another thing where I went on the town website, and the minutes for this committee they're not recent. My understanding is that there's something going on in terms of a site. They're looking at some site and evaluating that. So once that's done, it would be nice to have that information so people can start getting a sense of how much is this going to cost, what's the idea, etc.
I don't know enough to make an intelligent comment. I'm aware that there was ground behind the fire station that was uncertain pedigree or legal status, so it had to be clarified. And obviously when you look around at various town solutions for the emergency buildings, some are modest and some are not. And I take Joe's point that it's tough to see how you can fit that into a future budget without knowing more about how the town's sources of revenue might change over time. Does raise a couple of questions on the future of economic. There is a group of us working on the development of thinking for a mixed-use business park to support the idea that over time the tax base of Northfield might diversify a bit and include more commercial ventures that are carefully stacked in a protected environment that allows them to build or rent or lease properties at various sizes on a mixed-use site that essentially would have to be somewhere. And when you think about it, it has to be either on a farmland piece of ground or a community-owned property or a worked-out gravel pit or some situation in Northfield. So there's quite a bit of work to be done by the group to actually come up with what might be economic ways forward. What are your views on the idea of bolting on mixed-use business development park to the town of Northfield? B, I'll let you start with this one.
Well, I'm definitely interested in the idea. I think it'd be interesting to hear more about what the thinking is, particularly with COVID and the how some businesses are actually expanding and need more space because of the 6 feet requirement. So there's some opportunity in there that you wouldn't normally expect in a challenging economic time. But the one thing I learned from working at eBay is there are always businesses who do well in counter-cyclical times. So when the economy is low, there are certain businesses that will actually do quite well. And oftentimes it's surprising. So I wouldn't necessarily hold back from looking at the idea because of COVID, but also because of COVID, what does the business park actually look like? What does the space look like? How would you accommodate, now that we know some of these health considerations, how would you accommodate that? Which businesses want to expand at this point? Which businesses are just saying, I can't do anything until this is over with? So it'd be nice to know, that's another area, actually it'd be nice to know what the thinking is. And I know there's a lot of great people, including yourself, who are on that committee with a lot of experience. So it would be nice to have a public session, maybe on Zoom with that.
You're absolutely right when you say things have changed. Obviously, it's a developing world. It is, so from
It's
that
fluid,
point of view,
yeah.
we've realized it's not going to be a simple set of solutions, but the key is to taking one step forward at a time. Joe, do you have any input on that thought?
I do feel that we do need an additional form of revenue for the town, and I'm excited about the opportunity or ideas to open a business park. And like you mentioned before, I do feel that it's going to have to be a tactful one, in which your location is going to be key. Location will be everything with this, and also may want to consider an incentive form of tax reduction rate for a short period of time for businesses that come in here, to allow them the opportunity to grow and expand, and then later, when that term is up, then we can sort of utilize it. But do we particularly have the resources to allow these businesses to open? That's another thing to consider. Do we have the sewer system or the water supply that is stable enough to provide that type of expansion? These are all great options, and they should be taken into consideration. And I do support that, with the notion that it needs to be examined further. Yes.
The town has supported the thought that we might have some incidental money that might go to doing some preliminary studies to allow for a serious grant application from the state to help us evaluate final choices. But yes, you're absolutely right. It's a complex business, and in view of the situation we're in at the present moment, it probably won't happen quickly. But it is nevertheless interesting that you're both on board with the development of the concept, in concept at least. I am at the point where, if there's anything that either of you would like to reflect on as a result of our discussion today, and just, I wish I'd had the opportunity to talk about such and such, or I wish I'd said so and so. Do either of you have a retrospective thought on that? So I'm giving you a minute or two to talk, at least to think that over, while I suggest that the final question, that I think is probably the most important one of all, is if you should be fortunate enough to be elected, and are you ready to go to work straight away? I would imagine the answer to this is both yes, but the reality is also, the question is, in the event that you're not successful for this particular slot, do you expect to be an active participant in the next year's election to augment the board? So in other words, this is a one-time fits all, or do you believe you'll still have the enthusiasm to join next year should you not happen to be elected?
Are you saying one and done?
We're
out of here?
One or done, yeah. It's a good question, because fundamentally we don't want the impact of a decline on this particular situation to be a discouragement. So you have an opportunity to say, is there something I want to add to what I've said already? And I'll start with Joe, and then finally finish up with B.
Okay, I'd just like to say that I've enjoyed volunteering. I see no reason why I wouldn't come back next year if not chosen this year to be on a 5-member select board. When originally I submitted my nomination papers, I was under the impression I would be on a 5-member select board. So I have no problem holding off another year if not chosen this year. I do have some topics I'd like to talk about in my closure of today's discussion. I feel like prior to assuming the duties of a select board member, I have to avoid a confrontation. And to avoid confrontations, you have to establish boundaries ahead of time. And what I found lately, and over nearly a decade now, that in order to establish boundaries, you have to work towards a common understanding of how things operate. With the select board, this is the highest level of government work within our town. And what I'm seeing lately has been a lack of parliamentary law. Now, you're probably confused what parliamentary law is if you're not familiar with the term. It is the boundaries at which the rules of how government is operated under. What I'm seeing now is not parliamentary law. It is more of a courteous chaos. And when I say courteous chaos, it's because there's not a lot of argument, but there is sort of a failure to communicate effectively, where I see people on the select board meetings talking over one another, and I can't imagine how that feels for a concerned citizen to step forward and feel like they have to talk over someone or have their conversation cut off simply because we're not following the boundaries of parliamentary law. And that's something that I'd like to focus on as a candidate and select board member, about how we could adhere to Robert's Rules of Order and possibly bring a little bit more structured government back to where we become very lackadaisical in the last few years. That's all I have to say.
Thank you for the input. I think it will strike a few chords with a few people. B, would you care to add anything to your summary for today?
Two things. One, to your question about 3 to 5 and would I run again, similar to Joe, I thought I was running for the 5 until there was a change up in midstream in the nomination paper process. So that was, to my point about communication, that was a little disconcerting to be thinking you had 3 open slots, and I was working with other people. So I had 2 other people who were thinking about running based on the whole idea that there would be 5. So then when that changed in midstream, it was, I think, a little confusing, and Joe and I now find ourselves running against each other. So, which is fine, we'll take an additional step. But I think the 5, it bears repeating that right now with 3, because of open meeting law and the quorum of those 2 positions, of 2 out of the 3, you can't work with your fellow select board members outside of that meeting, which seems kind of crazy to me. If you have 5, then, for example, if there's a huge issue or something like the business park, let's say, where you really want more focus on the business park and you want to be bringing that into the select board discussions, then you could say, okay, 2 of you are going to peel off and become a subcommittee of some sort. I need to get up to speed on how that would actually...
Liaison of some sort.
Right. And go and spend some time with the business park committee. So there's the business of the normal business of Northfield, and then there's the business of moving the future of Northfield forward. Those two need to run in parallel. So to me, 5 allows you to do that because you get out of that stricture that the 3 has with the open meeting law. The second thing is, which I've mentioned before, is the committee structure that I found, and you must have found this too, in the Town Governance Study Committee. The committee structure that Northfield has is quite robust. There's a few committees that need more members, but we have a long list of committees, and we have a lot of people who participate on a regular basis, and there's a lot of expertise in those committees that could probably use a little bit more support. And I would imagine some of those people could come forward eventually as candidates. And if you're coming onto a 5-member board, having worked on a committee, a 5-member board is much more like a committee structure. You know, okay, if this guy isn't feeling well or has a family issue, then the other 4 people can pick it up and run with it. So I just want to emphasize the 3 to 5, as well as supporting our committee structure and helping those committees that maybe are lacking a few members right now.
I'd like to thank you both for those thoughts and input. I think we've reached the bit. Obviously, this is a conversation that could go on for a while, and we could throw another couple of topics on the table. But at the same time, people by this time should have a sense of you both and where you're coming from, and what essentially we all hope for in the way of a copacetic board and the evolution of the structure for Northfield. So I'd like to thank everybody for participating and being here today, and call it a day. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.